Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we can finally get things moving. I have the pleasure of the task of welcoming everyone to what we can now safely brand as the Mico CARE Centre's annual Autism Parent Coaching Workshop with none other than our Stick and Stay partners, Caribbean Autism Support for Education, CASE, led by the awesome Mrs. Deborah Santiago. Thank you, CASE. We appreciate you. These workshops over the years would not have been possible without you. And we are sure that this is going to be another impactful session of new discoveries and solutions. And parents, yes, we know that that is what you're here for, solutions. So we will now move straight into our program. To get our session off on the right footing, we'll of course have a prayer. Ms. Wesker, I think you can now begin with the prayer.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening, and we thank you for another opportunity for us to come together and for us to have another workshop. Lord, I pray that as we go throughout this evening, Lord, that we'll not have many technical challenges, but Lord, that all persons who come will feel enlightened, motivated. I pray, Lord, that the information shared will bring new insight to parents. We'll learn new techniques and tips on how we can work with our children. I pray, Lord, that you will just bless the persons who are presenting tonight, Lord, and the team that worked hard to put this together. I thank you for everything that you have done in helping us to prepare and everything that you will do for the remainder of this evening. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Wesker. Ms. Myers, you're now on.
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yes, so I am Carleen Myers, your moderator for this section, for this segment. In answering to our cries, a lot of us who have had to deal with and manage persons with autism within our families or support them, we have been crying out, I'm sure, for practical help, practical examples and strategies for the management of the tantrums and meltdowns of our children or the persons that we manage and take care of. So the answer for us today, in answering our prayers today and our cries, we have 5 persons who have great expertise in the area of autism. So among us today, we have Dr. Shannon Wharton, Deborah Santiago, Marley Renart, Marty Pyle, and Alexa Lavernia. Dr. Shannon is Assistant Director of the School Related to Psychological Assessment and Clinical Interventions Center in Nova Southern Eastern University, Florida, USA. Ms. Deborah Santiago is our autism coach on the panel this afternoon, and she's also the founder of the Caribbean Autism Support for Education, otherwise known as CASE. Marley Renart is our speech and language pathologist, and Marty Pyle is our special educator on this panel today. And last but not least, we have Ms. Alexa Lavernia, who is our occupational therapist. Ours is the privilege of having these wonderful professionals sharing with us and trying to help us with our challenges. Just of major note is that any questions that you have, we know that you might have had questions you might have come with questions, and you may also find yourself with other questions as the discussion progresses. We're asking you please to place those questions in the chat as the discussion progresses. Also, we want to ask you please to remember to fill out the evaluation form for the session after the session is over. The link for the form will be placed in the chat. So intermittently, you'll be able to access it and be able to fill out those forms for us. So without further ado, we want to say welcome to this distinguished panel. And we now hand over to Dr. Wharton, who is going to begin the panel discussion.
Good evening, afternoon, everyone. It's a little bit later here. Let me put my slides up. So give me 1 second to make sure I have it. And do this here. Okay. If those who I can see can give me a thumbs up that you see the PowerPoint. Okay, perfect. So you all heard that our focus today is on addressing temper tantrums and meltdowns from the perspective of multiple disciplines. And we wanted to do it this way as a kind of panel format because we know that every child experiences temper tantrums and meltdowns differently, right? We will often say, and you all have heard the old adage that you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, meaning our interventions, what we need to do and how we are going to understand what they're experiencing really is going to be different for every child. So we hope to give practical, useful information considering the emotional side, considering the speech and language, the OT side, considering all these different ways of thinking about our kids. So that's a little bit about who we are. So on the psychology side, which is where I'm going to be speaking from before I pass around to our panel, when I think about what a temper tantrum is, the most useful way for me to think about it as a clinician is that it's information, right? So when we see kids having big feelings, which is how I'll usually describe it, that tells us our kid either needs something or they haven't yet developed a skill. And I use the words big feelings, even though we're talking about temper tantrums, which is a behavior, because underneath that behavior is I'm going through something, right? And when we can figure out what is it that that child is going through, what do they need in the moment, or what skill like coping do they need to develop, that's going to significantly decrease not only the severity of what they're experiencing, but the chance that that will continue over and over and over. I want to set us all up for success. So the expectation is not going to be my kid's never going to have a temper tantrum, right? I work with kids all day and I know that's not realistic. Even the best of us cannot control behavior. We can help manage, we can guide, we can work with that child, but they're kids at the end of the day. They're going to continue to experience big feelings. So the goal so that we can be realistic with ourselves is that we can learn to manage it effectively. So let me pause here for a second. I'll pass it off to Debbie and then to hear from other panelists just on what is a temper tantrum.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alexa Lavernia. I'm the occupational therapist on the panel. From an OT perspective, how we look at a tantrum, like Dr. Wharton said, is our children are, telling us something. So we have to kind of layer that down and see what they want and what they need. In the moment, it may look like a behavior, but they're truly trying to communicate with us in that moment. So there's different things and different avenues we can go to try to see what they want or how they are trying to express themselves through different tools. So in the OT side, that's how we see it. They're trying to communicate with us through their tantrums.
I'm back, so hopefully you can hear me now. Working in the schools, we often see, of course, a lot of the behaviors within school, because school as itself is a place with expectations for our students. So when we're looking at our behaviors, we're always looking at the functions of their behavior. I know we're going to go more into it, but we usually we're like little detectives. There are usually 4 areas that we're observing that will cause the behaviors. One is usually the sensory area that affects our children. That's the smells, the noise, the sounds, the sensory area. One is if they're like escaping a task, if they are trying to maybe escape work, trying to escape a situation, a setting. One would be getting attention. If they want something, or they just want the attention of the adult. And the other one is usually a tangible, wanting to get something specific. So with our students, we usually are aware that when we do see behaviors, it's usually usually related to one of these, what we call functions of behaviors, which we're going to go more into later on. But that's one of the, these are the areas that we always usually see. And then once we find out the function of the child's behavior, we're able to help the child, to help them with what they need. So I'm just gonna say that, and then panel maybe from the high school perspective, just what you see, maybe Ms. Pyle.
Yes, from a high school perspective, I would say tantrums look a little different. The students aren't necessarily falling to the floor or throwing things. They've learned to self-regulate a little better. But you'll see in the regular classroom, in the general education classroom, they might shut down, put their head down, cover themselves up. They might stand up and start pacing around the classroom. So it looks a little different than it does at the elementary level, but they're definitely would still be considered a tantrum, it just appears differently.
And I think what happens is, because from the elementary and the really preschool level is when we have our children come in, we've been teaching them how to manage, we start teaching them how to manage the behaviors, and we're going to go into that. So we know that when they have these big feelings that Dr. Wharton was talking about, they now know how to manage it because they've been given the strategies. And as we go through, we're going to talk about the strategies that we teach them at a very young age, so that by the time they reach to middle school, which is 6th, 7th, 8th grade here in America, or high school, which we know it in Jamaica from 6th to 11th or 12th grade, the children have learned how to manage, hopefully, and then that's why the behaviors may not be as explosive as they look when they're younger.
And that idea is so important too, because with autism, we know that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning the autistic brain is different in how it approaches the world and how it makes sense of the world and how it learns, right? And different doesn't mean bad. And so that's something that I hope everyone can take away from this, that with a child or a person with autism who's experiencing these autistic meltdowns or temper tantrums, again, that tells us something about their world, right? It doesn't mean they're being bad. It means they're having a difficult time given the demands that they're experiencing. For example, a kid who is very scheduled, very routine based, something changes in their routine, they have big feelings, right? The idea is not, I want you to completely stop having these big feelings. Of course, we want to help them, but it's, what can we do next time a change happens? Do you need to learn about this change beforehand? Do you need me to write it on the board for you? Do you need a reminder? So it's making those coping, those modifications, that way we can prevent it moving forward. And I realize there's a typo on this slide, which I've looked at this slide many times, so I apologize. It's one of those things that your eyes overlook it. I just wanted to mention that. So skipping over, because we have spoken about this, but to highlight, an autistic meltdown is often very sensory oriented. That person is experiencing a lot of sensory stimulation that they essentially can't handle in the moment. It's too much. And so they begin to have a reaction, a big reaction to that. I'm going to skip over these for time's sake. So to the question of what are the different presentations of a tantrum or a meltdown, you heard a little bit about that from the high school perspective. And I would say from the psychology perspective, it really is dependent on the child. And meltdown is going to look very different. And you all here because you either have a child or you work with child. So I'm sure you've experienced this, and you know for kid A, it's going to be different than kid B. But I want to pass back to other panelists to share their perspective on this.
I would say from the speech pathology standpoint that they look different depending on if the child is verbal or nonverbal. We might just hear yelling and cries versus actual words coming out and verbalizing what they want or how they're feeling.
Great perspective. Yeah.
And also remembering that if a child is nonverbal, their behavior is definite communication. They're definitely trying. When you see behaviors, it could be that hitting another child is just them trying to say stop. That's their way, because maybe their words aren't there. If they're scratching somebody, it might be, I don't like that. I don't like what's going on now. I don't want to do that. If they're running away, it could be, I'm uncomfortable. So it could be the behaviors which look at the time, like very big behaviors, but it's maybe if they don't have a tool to communicate with yet, if they're not given maybe cards to help them talk, like in a communication book or some kind of a voice output device, which I know that Ms. Reinhardt will speak on more, their behaviors are definitely, most of the times, all the times probably, linked to communication.
Such an important point, and part of why we're sharing so much on this piece of it, addressing meltdowns and tantrums, really is in large part looking at how we're thinking about it. Because if my kid is having a tantrum and I'm thinking they're just being bad, or they're just not listening, or they're being disobedient, I'm going to feel more angry and more irritable, right? But if I'm saying, wow, they are having a really hard time, they're experiencing a lot in their little bodies, they don't know how to communicate it, to Debbie's last point too, that's going to soften me. That's going to let me start to regulate myself, which is hard. We're human too, right? So we're stimulated by their tantrums. So now I'm regulating myself and I'm thinking, okay, they're communicating, they need something in the morning, let me try to figure out what they need. And that's what brings us to this point here. How do we manage behaviors during tantrums and meltdowns when both at home and at public? And Debbie's going to start us off by talking about the zones and giving some guidance. And one thing I want to share too is part of addressing behaviors really is consistency. So yes, what I'm going to do at home is going to be different than public. I'm susceptible too. Sometimes when we're out and we're at the grocery store, we need to get something done. We just need to get it done, right? And so we might overlook some things that we might not overlook at home. But really the idea in addressing anything is consistency, so that child knows what to predict. That's how they thrive, right? If I am having a difficult time, my parent, my clinician, my whoever is going to respond this way every time. And that gives them a sense of safety, which automatically starts to de-escalate. So even though it's hard to do some of these things when out at public, and again, we have to be kind to ourselves, we're not going to be perfect at it. The goal is that we're going to try to be as consistent in implementing these things regardless of the setting. So Debbie, I'll pass this off to you now.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit of zones of regulation, which is a curriculum that was created by Leah M. Coopers. And it's something we use in many of the schools, but this is something that can be used in homes. So it's a very simple curriculum, really. And think I'm the person who works with the children who are very young. So they're coming in at 3 years of age to the school system. They have been identified with having autism or another developmental delay. And so our kids here do not even understand emotions yet. So for them crying, they really can't tell you. They really can't tell you whether they're crying because they're feeling sick or they want something at the time. So the goals curriculum, it helps to identify their feelings. So it helps them to learn the feelings they have. And also teaches them how to self-regulate. And we give them a little set of tools that are good, that are specific for them to use. So what one child may like to use to calm themselves might be different. So what is regulation? It's self-regulation's ability to control our own thoughts and emotions and to alter them based upon the situation. So we most people have that built in, but our kids with autism may not have that built in yet. So with the zones, we're teaching them that everyone has emotions. We don't label a zone or emotion as good or bad. We actually use just colors and then we explain what they are. And we call, instead of saying that the behaviors are bad, we call them, in this curriculum, it's called expected or unexpected. Expected behaviors, of course, are the ones you want them to do. Unexpected are the ones you don't want them to do. And we also help them to manage their own behaviors. So it's simple. It has 4 different colors, 4 primary colors: green, red, blue, and yellow. And from a child is very young, we teach them what these zones mean. The blue zone, as it kind of indicates, when you're feeling blue, you're feeling sad, you're feeling tired, you may be just feeling slow, sluggish. Green zone is the optimal zone where you want to be, where you're happy, you're calm, you're ready to work. The yellow zone, which is, I joke that this is a zone I'm in today because of doing this. I'm excited, but I'm a little bit, you know, a little anxious, little butterflies, that kind of feeling of not something that you don't do every day all the time, but you know, it's a kind of zone that will pass. And then you have the red zone where you don't want, and no one really wants to be in the red zone, but it can happen where you're angry, you're mad, you feel terrified, and you're out of control. So we teach them this. Of course, the green zone is the optimum state of learning because we're doing it on a school perspective. But again, this can be transitioned to home. They're ready to learn, they're ready to listen, they're ready to work hard, they're calm and they're focused. We go on to the next slide. The blue zone is that low energy zone where for some children, it might be just that they're tired and they need a rest. It might mean that they need a hug. Like some children need that pressure feeling like a hug from their parent. May need to take a break, just a little break, may need to listen to music, just may need a little rest. Sometimes our kids come in sometime and they sometimes come in tired because they didn't sleep the night before. And when they identify that this is where they are, they just need probably a little area, a little break area and a little rest. The yellow zone is that heightened state of alertness that you really can't keep up all the time, but you need it for certain things. Your energy is elevated. You could be that you're worried, that you're upset or annoyed. But if you're an adult, you can, like me, I can use my inner coach now and say, okay, well, you know, just calm yourself down. This is going to be okay. Or for a child, it may be, again, a break, taking a drink of water, taking a walk, a break from the classroom sometime. And then the red zone is the one, like I said, that you need to stop. You need to stop here. They're mad, they might be yelling, somebody has agitated them to a point, or they're feeling agitation within their self, anxiety, intense emotions. And for the children, like I've had children who are in the red zone, not because somebody annoyed them, but maybe because they're just have an autism with an anxiety part, and sometimes for some reason they get very, very anxious, and I've taken children out on runs just to kind of run it off. So this can be something that's related to anger, but it can also be something where they're just worked up within themselves in a very high way. So then deep breaths, looking at the size of the problem, and again taking a break. So a lot of the tools overlap. So how we teach this in the class is we teach them the proactive strategies. We teach them about the green zone, that it helps keep them calm and focused, and that they're following directions. In the blue zone, we help to try waking up their bodies. And maybe our OT, Miss Alexa, if you could speak to this, because I often watch our OTs work with our kids who sometimes are a lot in the blue zone with their bodies. And so these are the children that may do like wall push-ups, looking at books, getting a drink. I don't know if you want to say anything real quickly here, Miss Alexa.
Yeah, like Deborah said, sometimes your children come in really tired and they're a little down, so we kind of have to wake up their bodies. So we'll do a little bit of running, we'll do some wall push-ups, we'll do wheelbarrow walks, we'll even do some brushing on their skin to wake up their body so they're alert and ready and engaged, to then eventually get into that yellow zone or that green zone. They can be prepared and ready for class, you know, but we have to get their bodies ready.
And then the other zone is that red zone, of course, the yellow zone, where we're regaining control and calming down and just kind of getting themselves ready to work. A lot of times our kids like the little fidgets, because these will be our children who sometimes you'll see self-stimulating. They're like could be excited, or they're just trying to calm themselves down. So we may have fidgets that we give them, again, wall push-ups, just things for them to squeeze to calm them down. And then the red zone is really the zone where we want them to stay safe. We want them to really calm down. So this is where we have teach the deep breathing, the magic 8, which you'll see on the next slide. I'll show you how to drinking water again, asking for help, and positive self-talk. This lazy 8 breathing, and we're going to see more slides as we go along on ways to calm, but the lazy 8 breathing goes directly with this curriculum, and it's just teaching a child using it, like we start with a paper, using a figure 8, how to, when you reach that center, you take in a deep breath, you reach the star, and then you let out the breath when you continue the circle. I usually start with like paper with the 8 on it, but after a while they will use their palms to breathe in, reach the star, and breathe out. So they like doing it because it's a sensory thing. They're touching and feeling, but they're also breathing. And then also with this curriculum, we're teaching them the size of a problem, because for some of our children at first, the pencil point breaking in the classroom can be a major issue. So we have to teach them, this is a small problem. What can you do? You can ask for another one. You can show me your picture that you need another one. So teaching them how to communicate and teaching them how to handle the problems at the various levels. So they know the difference between what is a huge problem than what is something that would be a little or a medium-sized problem, and that the reaction goes with the problem.
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah.
To go along with this curriculum? These children don't have to be verbal to follow along with this curriculum. And that's what's great about it, is that they can just point to the color that they are in. And then from what color they're in, we can go and figure out a little bit deeper on how they're feeling, whether it's tired or frustrated or so on. But the colors help with our nonverbal children.
And what's interesting, how we do it in the schools that goes along with that, like in many of the classrooms, and this could be in a parent home too. We have the colors on the board, and the children will have their pictures or something on a magnet. And once they've learned the curriculum, when they come to school in the morning with their little magnet with their face or whatever, they will identify how they're coming to school. So then the teacher now has a conversation. If everybody's in green, they're ready to go. But if somebody comes and they're now in first grade, have learned that they are in the yellow zone or they're in the blue zone, then the teacher can, or the parent at home can address that. And sometimes what they do is the teacher may check in the morning in the school, and then maybe in the afternoon, because it also shows that your emotions can change during the day. So she may have a second session where they take their face again and say, well, today now I'm in this zone. Now I was in green, but really now I'm feeling tired, so I've moved to blue. So again, it's some emotional curriculum, and if they're learning it from very young, when they reach to the high school age or the young adult stage, they now know it's part of who they are, and they now know not only how they feel, but we also are teaching how your behaviors let others feel. So it's kind of goes hand in hand. And then this chart here is just like, how big is your problem? It goes along with the curriculum. Is it a glitch all the way to is it an emergency? And we have to teach them what it is. What is a glitch? Something very small. The pencil point, that's a glitch. All right, the emergency is an earthquake, a fire, danger to others. So we have to teach the levels of behavior. And again, it goes along with this kind of curriculum. And then, does the size of the problem match the reaction? Very important that if you're in a 1 or in a green area, that the reaction should be green also. If you're in a red area and it's a true red area, the reaction will be red. And then this little thing, it goes along with it. It's a Disney movie. It's okay to feel these emotions. It's how we deal with them that makes us the people we are. And this is from the Inside Out movie. So it's very easy to actually find on YouTube. So
I love this curriculum too, because we've heard how it can be applied in the schools, and it's also so easy to implement at home, right? Like if I wanted to do this today, I could take 4 pieces of paper, tape them on the wall with a blue crayon, write the blue emotion words, and then draw little pictures or even like cut out pictures that represent the activities that go along with it, right? And we heard how comprehensive it is too, because it really ties into the occupational therapy needs, the body related needs. It ties into the speech related needs for kids who are not speaking. We said that these behaviors are communication, and this is such a powerful way for our kids to communicate and to learn these much needed skills that Debbie mentioned can be translated as they get older. So before we continue to talk more, especially on the psychology side of things, I want to throw back to our other panelists. From your perspective, what can we do to help kids manage their tantrums, whether they're at home or in public?
So I think going along with these zones, using other visuals are also a great tool, especially for those nonverbal children who might be getting frustrated and throwing these tantrums because they can't verbalize how they're feeling. And so even just visuals of yes and no, that could be parents can change the way they're asking a question so their child could respond with just two simple answers. And that can help reduce some of those tantrums. Things also like reinforcers. If you know your child calms down with their one stuffed animal, bring that with you when you go out, have it in your bag, you know, in case of emergencies or in case that a tantrum does happen, you can have that reinforcer there.
And just on piggybacking on that, our children, as we know, and I've said in our prior parent coaching workshops, they are visual learners. So the more, even the ones who have language are visual learners. And so I've always talked about in the schools, we use visuals, they know what they expect. Some children, and visual doesn't necessarily mean picture, it could be a written word visual, it could be like a list. Those things like lists, those things actually help calm them because they kind of thrive on routine and expectancy. So that's something to consider, and also like any changes that are going to happen, that you let your child know. If you're going out, going somewhere in a setting that they've never been to before, you might want to talk to them about it, because you might say, you know, we're going to, it could be a fair, something you think that is exciting. We're going to, you know, a show, but it's at the stadium. Let's talk in Jamaica. They're going to a place in a stadium show. That's going to be loud. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be a lot of change for a child on the spectrum. So this is a child that would need priming before, talking to before, maybe even showing them where they're going. So just knowing the expectancy of what they're going to, the change that's going to happen, because it's something different, can prevent a tantrum or can prevent a meltdown.
Such an important point, because even for neurotypical people, even neurotypical adults, any uncertainty is going to lead to feeling uncomfortable, right? And for kids with autism and people with autism, we've already said that emotion dysregulation and not understanding the emotional experience, that's something we often see, right? And so these new experiences are going to feel it and not have a way of making sense of it. And so that level of preparation helps make sense. Let me take a second to see if anyone else wanted to jump in.
I would say at the high school level in the general education classroom, we're not necessarily using the zones in the same way, but we definitely still use key parts of it. Maybe we're not using visuals per se, like Deborah was saying, but we have lists written down. So it's a visual that they're looking at. It's whether it's a planner, some way they're organizing. It's important to understand in the classroom what the triggers are. So maybe it's the amount of noise in the classroom that's triggering the student to have a tantrum or meltdown. Maybe it's the assignment, the workload is too much at one time, or maybe it's a schedule change like we were talking about. You know, if anything, there's a little change in the schedule can really send a child off. So at that level, I think it's important just to recognize what the triggers are and then be able to head it off before it turns into a full-out tantrum.
I just want to say, like, in regards to that, I know that the parents, you know your children, and you will know their triggers. You will know it. So the thing is to either avoid that trigger. I mean, it sounds simpler, or you know, or prepare them for it. So to give them a quick little story, I was in the supermarket not too long ago. There was just this young adult, very big guy, and with his family, and I knew he was on the spectrum, I knew he was autistic, and he started to make sounds. He just started to make sounds. And just from the sounds he started to make, I said to myself, this is not going to be good. It's not going to be good. I didn't know him personally, but I knew that his sounds were triggers. He didn't want to be in the supermarket. He didn't want to. Maybe it was just too stimulating. But the parent had an agenda and she needed to get down. So she was like, you okay? You okay? Can you do it? Like she was trying to get him to like finish out. Well, it ended up where he was a very big guy. Then he started screaming, a lot of people catching a lot of attention. And then they had to leave kind of more once it had gone too far. But it was just that at that point where the trigger was there, the sound started, somebody probably should have walked out with him at that point, because he kind of went beyond where he should have gone. So you kind of have to heed the triggers, especially if it's a meltdown. Remember, no, not a tantrum like a young child throwing a tantrum, but your child with autism is about to have a meltdown in a public place. Then you kind of, if possible, like take them from the situation that will cause it.
And with that, taking them from the situation and verbalizing, okay, we're going to set a 2-minute timer to play with this toy, or a 2-minute timer to do our 8 breathing, and give them that time to calm themselves down and then transition on to the next.
At the high school level, I think it's important that the student has a safe place they can go to, since they're going to be in different classrooms during the day. They're not in the same classroom necessarily all day long. So it's important to find maybe one classroom they can go to when they just need time to de-escalate, or a safe person they can go to. Just finding that area where they're able to decompress.
And this would translate into the home also. That room they go to, that space they go to. So whatever, sometimes you're going to refer to school, but if you think about it, everything that we're talking about can translate to the home.
I think too, it's okay for our parents to kind of practice going into these public places like the grocery store, because just as you're learning about your child, you need to learn what the triggers look like, or what works for them in that moment. Maybe it's a fidget, or maybe it's preparing their bodies before. So sometimes maybe it's okay to walk in and then we're just going to walk out. But the next week you go again, maybe you make it towards the back of the store and that was it. So little small moments where you start to learn and you can kind of gauge the situation to help your child is great.
I think is so important too, because that's what allows them to experience that success, right? Because if we push it too much, like you need to be okay in the grocery store, then we're connecting the grocery store to fear and anxiety and overwhelming feelings. And then that is just not going to be good. But if we do little by little and give them that feeling like, okay, like I can handle 1 second and tomorrow I can handle 2 seconds, then we work up to where we want them to be. Because the idea, at least for me, the idea is not that we need to change people with autism. We want to allow them to be who they are and support and promote who they are, and to live their life in a way that's fulfilling, right? And we live in a neurotypical society, which means having some of these adaptive skills like going to the grocery store is going to be important, even if it is difficult at the beginning, but we can work up towards it. And something I like to include, I love this social media handle. They talk about during times of distress that as adults, it would be incredibly hurtful to be ignored or worse, sent away during times of distress. And that's often the kind of like pull we have when our kids are having these really big feelings, like I cannot deal with this, go away, or go to timeout, or just not in front of me, right? When again, this is communicating to us that they need us right now in a certain way, and to show up and be present for them. And this was already articulated, so I'm going to skip over. So something in the moment we can do when they are having a tantrum is using ourselves to help regulate. And I'll come back to this idea of self-regulation, but literally just getting on their level and making eye contact. If eye contact is hard or not possible for that particular child, then we don't do that, right? For some kids with autism, that's difficult. We model our calmness and we practice labeling the feelings, just like we saw for the zones. And we encourage the use of coping, which we're going to talk about now. So it might sound so simple, you're feeling sad. But when they hear that over and over, they start to learn, I'm crying, this person's saying I'm sad, I must be feeling sad. So instead of next time I'm sad and I have a tantrum, they might say, I'm feeling sad. Then the next step, just like we saw in the zones, is when you're sad, you get a hug. When you're sad, you can watch 2 minutes of your show. When you're sad, you can go for a walk. So it's really kind of developing these scripted responses that might not be innate, but they're still super helpful. And learning, here's what I've learned when I feel this way. Oops, I did not mean to do that. Let me put it back. Okay, so how do we teach our kids to develop these coping mechanisms and to regulate their emotions? Bunch of disclaimers. There is no rule book. Of course, you all know this. So this is not like the how-to guide. You do this, everything's going to be wonderful. This is more of practicing trial and error. What's going to work for this particular kid, and giving yourself permission to engage in that trial and error and to attempt things. And if they don't work out, not to say, oh my gosh, this is never going to work. It's never going to be fixed. I'm a failure. To say, okay, this particular thing didn't work. Let me try the next thing. And to not compare our kids. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's just going to make us feel horrible, either as parents, as educators, as clinicians, that we are looking at gains for that kid. So going with the grocery store example, if they can only handle 2 seconds today and 3 seconds tomorrow, that is wonderful. That's moving towards the right direction, even if other kid can be in the grocery store for an hour. So we're focusing on our kid. And we also want to consider developmental implications, right? So a 3-year-old, they're going to have temper tantrums. It's going to look different for a child with autism, but we also want to consider, is what they're experiencing just appropriate for their age, or is it really not appropriate for their age? Because again, we don't want to set them up for failure. So I encourage you, listen as we continue talk, pick one thing this week, right? It's Thursday, maybe over the weekend, you try one of these coping skills with your kid, or next week at work, you try one with the kids you work with, see how it goes. If it doesn't, try another, but don't try to do so many things all at once. We talked about assessment, so I'm going to kind of skip over this for now and talk about co-regulation. So I love this quote: what we are teaches the child far more than what we say, so we must be what we want our children to become. This is a really big ask, and co-regulation basically means our kids are looking to us to figure out, how do I feel in the moment and how do I respond in the moment? So if they have big feelings and we have big feelings, we're going to keep getting big feelings from them. So even though it's, again, very difficult, trust me, I get it, what to remain calm, to not yell, to be as put together as possible, that is one of the things that we are practicing as the person involved in that child's life, because they're going to see and they're going to begin to model, like, oh, when I'm feeling this way, this is how mom's acting, or this is how teacher's acting, and I can do it too. If they're taking a deep breath, I'm going to practice taking a deep breath. It's also important to remember that feelings are for feeling. And this is like the simplest but most profound, one of the most simplest but profound things I've ever heard in psychology. I absolutely love this quote because it's so true, that usually not good feelings we want to not experience, right? But our task and what we're working with kids is to feel everything and practice, because it's that frustration tolerance that becomes really difficult. I feel bad, I don't want to feel bad, so I freak out, right? The goal is, I feel bad, I know it's temporary, I know what to do when I feel bad, and I'm going to do that thing, and eventually this bad feeling is going to go away. So when we practice feeling everything, staying with it, but engaging in our coping, it actually helps a lot more in the long run than if we try to just avoid. And the goal is not to feel happy all the time, right? That's not possible. We don't feel happy all the time as adults, so we can't expect that from our kids either. It's about just practicing all of these things. I'm going to skip over some things as we talk.
And just one more thing, Dr. Wharton, is they did not take it personally. A lot of times when a child is doing a behavior, sometimes an adult could take it personally. And it's really not about the adult. It's usually about how they're feeling, what's going on either inside of them, what they want, their functions, but it's not a behavior against the adult with our kids. It's not that. It's what they are experiencing. So when maybe if you have that mindset that it's not something against me, that it will help you to calm down, because you know you're the support system that's going to help, who's going to help the child to calm down by yourself being very calm. So just something to remember, that it's not really, I'm doing this because you did that. It's more like, I'm doing this because I have a need of some kind.
Exactly. And I think that really helps to manage like our own frustrations.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And the language piece is so much a part of that. And we've already said that when we empower kids with language, it helps to decrease their emotional uneasiness. We're giving them words to understand what they're experiencing. And we're labeling it for ourselves too, because again, that idea of co-regulation, if you as a parent, you as a teacher, you as a clinician say, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm going to take a few minutes to myself, that shows them, oh, that's what it looks like. This is how you communicate. This was what her face looked like when she's frustrated. And then she said frustrated. So all of this is a learning experience, and we can do this through books when we're reading a picture book with our kids and we say, oh, what do you notice about his face? What do you think he's feeling? Oh, he's sad. How would you know he's sad? Oh, he's feeling mad today. What do you think he's going to do when he's mad? You could, whatever you like, books, movies, TV shows, drawing it yourself, looking at people while you're people watching. The idea is practicing this and making it a regular part of the routine, because it really, I found it so interesting. Kids who have such a hard time with this, when they hear it over and over, they'll then hear somebody cry in the next room and be like, oh, that kid's sad. Yes, because they've learned crying equals this, and this is what we could do.
But it had to be taught. Most with our kids, most of the times it has to be taught, because they're not able to label it unless they're taught.
Right, exactly. And feeling faces chart, again, if we have kids who are not speaking, showing either in a cartoon way or with real pictures what these emotions can look like. So if they are experiencing something and they can't say, I'm mad, I'm sad, they can point to these. And as they get older, more nuanced, because there's however many faces on here. When they're little, they might learn a few emotion words, but as they get older, they can learn more. And there's some really cool feeling books too. I mean, if you just go on Amazon, there is a ton, but these are some I have come across that also help to make it a purposeful conversation. And you heard earlier about breathing strategies and some versions of it, and there's so many out there. I included some more here too. Something that some kids like, because they like stuffies and loveys and stuffed animals, is to put like one on their stomach while they're lying down, and when they take big breaths, they kind of like watch that stuffed animal go up and down too. Or even like imagining that they're squeezing a lemon, or literally giving them a stress ball, because it sounds so silly, right? Like, why does that work? But that's putting all their attention on those physical sensations, and that focus and that attention is then taking things away from that emotional experience and allowing them to regulate, if you will. Cute things
I
like
would
smelling
ask-
flowers and stuff. Go for it.
Miss
Debbie.
Alexa, in the soothing, because I've had parents ask me about this. They've asked me about the weighted blanket, the weighted, or the difference between the weighted and the compression. Can you speak to that, about how it might help with regulation?
Yeah, sometimes our kids are overstimulated, so we might use a weighted vest, or we might use a weighted blanket. We'll also do heavy work activities that might look like a handstand, or maybe pushing a heavy laundry basket, to release some of that tension, some of that energy. And in turn, it'll calm their bodies. It's almost like us adults, when we work out and we're exerting all that energy, at the end of the workout, we kind of feel a sense of calm and relief. The same is for our children. So a lot of weighted activities is great to calm them.
To just pause here too. Any other thoughts from other panelists?
I would say at the high school level or with older students, you can still use these techniques. I would often have my students, you just breathe slowly to calm themselves back down. We use that quite a bit. So it's not just for younger children also. Use this all the way up, because it really gives them the chance to learn how to self-regulate and take control of their own body.
Even for adults, because we underappreciate how powerful these things can be. And it sounds so simple, like just breathe, but it's really hard. Even when I get anxious, I will purposely take a second and just engage in my breathing. And it does, you feel the difference, right? And then that decreases anxiety. Something I really like too is this grounding technique. And I've seen it work really well with kids. And sometimes I'll change the last one, the thing you can taste, because that's not always feasible, especially if you're working with kids versus like at home with your own kids. But if they're experiencing big feelings, again, they're internally focused, you want to make them externally focused, ground them to their environment. So you, in that moment, say, tell me 5 things you can see. Oh, you see the light up there, you see the window, the trees moving. What else do you see? 5 things they can see, 4 things they can feel. You feel the chair under you, you feel the table, they're coming up with things. 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and if not, 1 thing they can taste, 1 fun thing that happened to them today. You can, change it around. But it's really cool to see how something so simple, this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique, just kind of brings them back to the moment and allows them to escape the emotional dysregulation they were experiencing.
Can I go
Liz-
back to the breathing? To
Yeah.
go along with the breathing, I know a lot of my students, like when I tell them to take a deep breath or something, they look at me like, Miss Marley, are you crazy? So I add movement in because an OT taught me that once, and I have them like raise their hand or just wiggle their fingers or breathe, like opening and closing their hands. You take a breath in, you blow out, you take a breath in. And that I've noticed a lot of my students using that independently on their own, because it's not just me telling them breathe in and breathe out.
I love that. And I'm trying to go backwards. If you look online, just Google it, progressive muscle relaxation, child script or kid script. There's so many cute ones to that idea too, Marley, that I'm sure you use also, right? Where they pretend to be cats and they arch their back, or they pretend that they just ate the lemon and they like purse their lips, or they pretend like they're, I don't know, an elephant and they lift their legs up, right? It makes it fun and engaging with them, for them. And then they remember it better too. So rather than like, let's practice our breathing, let's practice being a cat and an elephant and a lemon eating person, and they enjoy it. So that's a really great technique. We heard about making a space within their either home or classroom that they can go to regulate. That's so useful, and it's going to look different for every kid. This is one version of what it could look like, where that child has their stuffed animals, they have things on the wall, they have books that help them regulate. You want to think through maybe 5 things, right, that your kid feels very calmed by. And you might even go back to that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, visuals, things they can hear and listen to, tactile, and have it in that environment. This is not a timeout spot. So that's really, really important. This is not a place they go when they are being disciplined. This is a place they go to for them, and that they go to for comfort. And this is somewhere they can go even if they're not having a temper tantrum, because one of the things that is useful to remember is regulating is a skill, right? So like if I'm very scared of airplanes and I practice breathing for the first time when I'm like in my seat on the airplane, it's going to be a little bit helpful. But if I practice every day leading up to it, even when I'm calm and not on the airplane, by the time I get there, now I'm really good at it. Now I know how to calm my body and I know what it feels like. So we want to make this normal and typical and part of their day. And again, never as discipline. And maybe they have these kind of visuals, again, for our kids who are not speaking or perhaps not reading, so that they can remind themselves, because we want to take the guesswork out of it. We don't want them to have to think in the moment, okay, I'm having a hard time, what do I do? No, we already know what we can do. We've already talked about this. We have a plan, right?
And that's very important as parents or as teachers, that remember all these skills have to be taught to the children when they are in that good green area, when they're in that calm, safe spot time where they're ready to learn. That's when we're teaching the strategies, not at the time when the meltdown is happening, because it's not going to work. So it's something that's taught before, so that when they have it, that's the tool that they're going to draw on then. You can say, remember what we taught, remember what we talked about, let's try it during that time.
So important. Yeah. Tantrum's not a time to explain, to reason, to lecture. And I've been there too, where I've been working with a kid who's having a big tantrum, and I find myself going back to the like helping them rationalize and helping them think reasonably. And then I'm like, well, this is not going anywhere. Of course it's not, because they're completely dysregulated. They can't think. It's like when you are in a very stressful situation, you can't think. You're just figuring out like, how do I stop feeling this way? And how do I get out of that situation, right? And that's why we go to these coping. I'm gonna skip over some of this. Play is underappreciated as well. It's the job of kids, if you will, but having time where they can play allows them to engage in whatever they're interested in. That gives them like that self-regulation, right? Like filling their cup, so to speak. So even though we think like they're wasting time or they're just playing, they're not doing their chores, they're not doing whatever. No, it's really important that they have unstructured time every day. And I won't go into this for time's sake, but the research supporting the benefits of play is amazing. And I love this quote. They said, children don't say, I had a hard day, can we talk? They say, will you come play with me? And that's so powerful, right? Because we can then read in between the lines when our kids, again, either at home or at school, say that. And something I like to think about for behavioral challenges is that instead of thinking my kid is attention seeking, they're really connection seeking. Again, it communicates to us like they need us, which again feels nice in some ways and feels overwhelming in other ways. And so we want to take care of ourselves in the process. So let me stop here for a second and throw to the panelists either to talk to any of those points or to share sensory-based techniques that help kids regulate.
Well, just back to like the playing, not only is it playing and releasing all these bodily, feelings that they may have, like the working out, but also for our kids is that social emotional time. Because remember, they're not naturally, they're based on their language and their lack of their language and their processing. The social emotional part is something we need to help them to engage in. So for a young child, social emotional playing is how they're learning to interact with other children and interact appropriately. So on an elementary level, that's important. And on a high school level, it's, hanging out at recess, having out just even for chatting. What else? In your high
Even
school,
some
Marty?
of the kids, I would say in the younger grades, they might not play exactly with another, but even if
Right.
they're parallel playing or
Right.
they're playing the same toy as someone else, that's their type of playing
Right.
or engagement.
And then it can build. It can build from the parallel play to eventually interacting with others. Sensory.
I'd say at the high school level, it is lunchtime, encouraging them to eat lunch with other kids. There's a lot of opportunities to be in clubs.
Yeah.
Help them find an interest in something, then they get involved that way.
Yeah. And to connect to others too, I've noticed that as well is such a great need that a lot of our autistic teens especially feel like there's no one else like them out there, no one interested. And maybe in their particular school, no. And I try to tell them like your school is so small compared to the world, right? It might be like actually a big school, but there are so many kids out there who do have similar interests and who are like them and who they can connect to. I'll try to zoom through some of the rest because I know we want to spend a lot of time until we end at 7 on questions. So just to highlight a few more things in terms of sensory needs, we heard of a few options and the simplicity behind it becomes so powerful for them. So for example, a fidget was mentioned. I've had kids literally ask me for a fidget and say it helps me think so much better. It helps me answer your questions so much better when I have something in my hands. And that to me was like, wow, like thank goodness that kid could say that. A lot of kids don't, but we can offer it. Or even having like a little basket of fidgets in our office or in the house that they can turn to. So a few things in terms of prevention. We've said that schedules and routines really, really help to have that simulation. You heard of ways from an occupational therapy perspective, we can do that. We've talked a lot about coping skills as well. And I'll just mention too, picking and choosing our battles can be really helpful for us as well. And again, we're starting big and we're working towards something bigger. We've heard about preparing our kids for big transitions, milestones, what's going to happen, giving them trial runs. Books are a great way. I wish I remember the name. I can look it up and get it back to you all another time. But there's a set of books that are specifically designed for kids with neurodevelopmental disorders that help walk them through a lot of tasks. So going to the doctor, going to the dentist, going grocery shopping, going to the mall. It puts things in pictures and words and gives them a way to experience it without experiencing it. So it takes that ambiguity out of it. And just simply building in more time, which is really on us, right? Not saying, okay, I'm going to get out of the house in 5 minutes, but being realistic, thinking, okay, I know it's going to take me an hour. So let me just take the hour and not be frustrated in the process. Another thing that I found really helpful is during transitions, building in a middle ground. So if and this happened recently, that I was working with a kid, they were doing something they really, really liked, and it was time to be done and to leave the room. And when I said, okay, all done, and I'd give them warnings, let's leave now in so many words, they said no, and they kind of like threw themselves on the floor. So the next time I went from, okay, you're doing this preferred activity, let's call it drawing, to, oh, hey, there's this really cool poster by the door. Can I show you? They came to look at the poster by the door. So that's like an okay activity, but now they're by the door, right? And so after we looked at it for a few seconds, I'm like, okay, now we're all done. And it was way easier to kind of like usher them out of the door. So going from preferred to an okay activity to a non-preferred, which in this case was leaving, can be really helpful, make it more tolerant for them. So the last piece before we go to questions, any final thoughts from, maybe we have other things, but final thoughts from the panelists on what parents can do?
Sometimes for older kids, when they're having a hard time transitioning, for example, at the beginning of my session, I'll make a list of what we are going to do so they know what to expect. So let's say number 4, we were drawing a picture, and number 5, it's time to go. As we're doing number 4, I'm like, look at your schedule. Next, it's time to go. So they already have the advanced notion that after this, we're going to clean up and our session is over. That anticipation that sometimes can create that uncertainty, or that they don't want to transition, but once they know the steps and the order, they kind of have a smoother transition out.
The same with
the
same with the younger children. When they come to the session, or maybe when they come home from school, you know, you can tell them, okay, first we're going to do our homework, then we could have a few minutes of play, and then we're going to take a bath. And in between those, you can set timers. And if you know that the child isn't going to want to clean up, give them the option. Do you need 2 minutes or do you need 3 minutes? Let them choose and have that feeling that it was their choice.
Yeah, the choices are very powerful. So when you have something, you know, when you have anything that you want them to do, and you give them a choice to do it, especially when they're moving from a non-preferred, or they're moving from a preferred to something that's non-preferred, and you give them a choice, well, you can either do this or do that. It gives them a sense of power. So it's a helpful transition tool to have by giving them choices.
Absolutely. And sometimes the choice is, do you want to walk out of the grocery store, or do you want me to carry you out of the grocery store? Right? Like we have a goal that we need to get done, but you can tell me how you want us to get there. And it's okay. Again, we're humans. For you as a parent or teacher or whoever, to take a personal time out. We have to make sure the child is safe, of course, and that they're supervised and cared for. But we can say, I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm going to take 2 minutes to practice my deep breath and come back to it. It's modeling, it's taking care of ourselves, and it's showing them how we engage in these coping mechanisms too. And so we've talked a lot about what we can do to fill our cups. We might create visuals. I'm going to skip over this and really go to questions and to our moderators to help us through that.
Hello, it's night here it's afternoon in Jamaica and night in the UK. I was following the chat group and I noticed that there are several parents who have been asking or mentioning that their children aren't speaking. Some of these parents would have reported that their children are maybe 5 years old, 4 years old, 7. I think I've seen it up to 10 in the chat group. And they were seeking a response about, will their child ever talk? What are the expectations about their child speaking? Additionally, I noticed that there was another practical question about brushing of teeth. My son also has that situation where, it's a bit of a struggle to get him to brush his teeth. I get persons to help me and we eventually get it done. But I'm not sure if you have any other practical suggestions in terms of getting them to brush their teeth, and the question, will they ever speak? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henry. Thank you. Those are some of the points I was seeing as well. I'm Caroline Myers. So as we continue I continue with the moderation, with it being the moderator for this segment. The concerns that parents are expressing are surrounding sleep, bedtime tantrums, or late night tantrums, potty training resistance, so tantrums during potty training or during potty time. Many parents are concerned, as Ms. Henry said, about whether or not the child will speak, because some children began speaking and then they stop after a while and they're not sure how to progress with them. Another concern as well surrounds getting the child to focus on the schoolwork, not the textbook. So several persons expressed concerns in these areas. So based on our expertise or our area of focus, our different areas of focus right now, I'm going to ask that our panelists, by the way, thank you very much for such a robust discussion. If you could just speak to these different areas for us. How to get the child to sleep at bedtime, or to get them to calm down without taking hours, as some persons were expressing. That's one of the questions that's being asked.
All right, so if we're going to start with that one, I would say that if, just like in the schools, we have schedules, that if they could probably, if they don't have one, maybe start with a home schedule. It would be, and ideally, it would be good if the school had a schedule and the home had a schedule, so then the child understands a schedule. And so maybe this might be, if the school is not doing it, it might be a conversation that the parent could have with the teacher at school. Said, you know, since my child, if there could be an inclusive setting and they may not be using that technique, but maybe getting the school on board to use a schedule, so that will make the child calm in school. And then when you're doing it at home, once a child sees, well, this is my schedule for home, and it's something you have to teach them. Going to come home, eating dinner, taking a shower, blah, 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 and even checking it off, that they're now coming to expect bedtime. That's a start, because maybe they're not doing that. And by just seeing it and knowing that it's coming, it might be something that is expected. Because it could be that, it could be like they could be doing their favorite game, and then mommy and daddy could come in and say, okay, it's time for bed now. And that just throws them off, because you're taking away what I'm doing and it's my favorite thing. I know you're saying I have to go to bed. But if you kind of build in the expectancy, that could be one way of dealing with that. Anybody
And
else
with the schedule, you can also add the timer in. So even though they know that they get to watch their show before they go to bed, you know, as their show is ending, someone can say, okay, now there's only 4 more minutes and then we're going into the bedroom. So just so you know, there's 4 more minutes, and keep, you know, the repetition.
And it might be that it doesn't work the first time. You know, you have to remember that strategies aren't magical, that they work like that. But with practice, they work, because then it becomes the expectancy of the child. It becomes the norm. It becomes routine. So a lot of times when we just stick to what we're doing and not just try it one time, it will have benefits.
And sometimes that can take months too, which again, we are hoping that it is going to be quicker, but the reality is it can take months. And so making sure we're keeping up with it. And as long as we're seeing those little gains, like I've seen kids who can't brush their teeth at all, right? And then one day they at least like let the toothbrush come close to their mouth. That's a gain. And then maybe a few weeks later, they let it touch one tooth for 1 second. That's a gain. And something else to think about too is the why. So if a kid is having a hard time going to sleep, or that's when you're noticing the tantrums, why? Is it that they miss you? Is it that they wanted to still play their video games? Is it that they're scared of the dark? Is it that they don't like the feel of their sheets? For autistic kids, there can be a lot of sensory related challenges that are getting in the way of that routine. And so that's something to consider, like what modifications can we make? Same with brushing teeth, right? Because that's very unpleasant for a lot of autistic kids. That feeling or that taste can be very off-putting.
Alexa, do you have anything? Yeah, I was going to ask you about the brushing of the teeth and the potty.
So for sleeping, we do a lot of sensory before to get our kids ready to go to bed. to go to bed. So that might be a lot of heavy work. Heavy work has proven to calm the central nervous system in our kids and really relax them before they go to bed. That might look like going up the stairs or carrying a plate of books to their room, different things where they're moving their body and really releasing that energy before they're going to bed. Also with the toothbrushing and sleeping, a lot of modeling can help. So like for the sleeping, if they have maybe a toy doll that they can put to sleep and they're in control and they're putting the doll to sleep, maybe in turn, it'll help them put themselves to sleep and that transition to the nighttime routine. With brushing teeth, a lot of my kids, I do like potato head. We'll brush the teeth on the potato head or on the doll, and then we'll try it on them. It has to be a gradual thing because brushing teeth is a little, it's a big sensory concern for a lot of our kids. They don't like the feeling. So maybe we'll start here on our hands. We'll brush the hands so they can feel the sensation versus feeling it on their face. And then we'll gradually start working our way to the teeth. But a lot of modeling first, and then we'll work into the mouth.
And remember that all these things, doing it with a child who's 2 and 3 and starting it then, and then starting with a child that's 10 and 11, there's a lot to catch up. If you're just saying, okay, you have to give yourself some patience and timing, because if your child is an older child or like maybe a middle school or like a 50 or a teenage child, and you're going to start these strategies, remember they've had years when they weren't doing them. So you have to be kind of patient while you're helping them try some of the strategies, is just what I'm saying.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope our questions are being answered so far. I'm getting a lot of information from you. So our participants, I'm sure, are being encouraged by what you're sharing. Our concern is as well is about potty training resistance and also speaking, whether the child will speak. There are a lot of concerns surrounding those.
Okay, Ms.
If you want to speak to that.
Ms. Renner, you can go for the language. Where's our speech and language pathologist?
I'm here. So with the speaking, like we said earlier, you want to use a lot of visuals, especially if they're older children, maybe not 8, 9, 10, and they have not been in therapy yet, or they aren't getting, that attention that they needed. It's going to be difficult starting now, but start bringing in the visuals is going to help them, give them a voice and help them make those choices that maybe they're having meltdowns now because they're unable to express themselves. So even if it's simply writing the words yes and no on a piece of paper, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, or a check and an X. Start small, and then parents will see, or teachers will see communication through that. And if they're doing these things at home, try to maybe have it also be done in school so that it carries over from place to place.
And I think sometimes the mindset is that if I use a visual, because I've had parents say this to me, that my child will not speak. So if you want to just elaborate.
Yes. So just because we're using visuals doesn't mean that the adults shouldn't also be verbalizing. They should be verbalizing everything they're doing, whether their child is speaking or not. It's going to help them gain that vocabulary. So if they're making dinner, I'm getting the spoon and I'm stirring the pot, and now I'm going to get the hot water. Everything they're saying, their children are picking up on, even if they're not producing it verbally. So using those visuals is only going to benefit and help them in their communication. There's no harm in it.
Right.
And
I
Marley,
remember it's communication. Language is communication, but communication is you're getting your point across. So
yes, it doesn't have to be verbal.
Right.
Communication is hand gestures. It's if you want to teach them simple sign language, things like more, or things like that. You can Google and YouTube sign language and start watching that with your child. And then that's a form of communication as well as socialization.
and is it true, Marley, that most kids and people with autism will engage in some speaking, but for those who don't and who are non-speaking, then that goal is communication, right? Like learning
Correct.
other ways.
Correct. So, if we have, let's say, an 18-year-old who is nonverbal, chances are that's what's going to continue, but that doesn't mean that they can't communicate with us. They can communicate via sign language. They can communicate through an iPad or a device, or even just a piece of paper core board. It doesn't have to be verbal communication, verbal words to be communication.
All right, thank you. Thank you, ladies. There is a question also about getting the child to focus on the schoolwork and not just the textbook, or instead of just the textbook, in order to get the schoolwork done. I would imagine that this is like a homework setting. Right. Okay, you
So
can go ahead.
so that they're not wanting, so that they're not wanting to do the work.
Right, but they will spend the time looking through the textbook.
Okay, so then maybe a strategy that I might try for that one would be like a first then kind of strategy. Or first thing is like, first you do this, then you're going to get like a highly favored reinforcer to get them to do it. So it might be that it's don't have them be able to go to their iPad or do whatever they want when they want, but you might use it for this thing. Well, you need to do your work. So first we're going to do this homework, then you're going to get 10 minutes on your iPad and or whatever it is, whatever is their reinforcer, whatever it is that is their preferred thing that they want to do. But then that, that is putting in, that's the parent when putting in, you're putting in your demands, but you're saying first this needs to be done, then you can do that. Or for a child who has a series of homework, or like maybe their older child, it could be like a board where then, okay, you did your reading, you get a star. You did your math, you get, like it's a build up, because it might be 4 or 5 things they have to do before they get their reinforcer. So you might reward each little step. And then after they've done their 3 sets of homework that they have, I know it's Jamaica and I know they have extra lessons. So after they've done 3 sets of homework they have, then they're reinforced.
You can also break it down farther than that. If it's, a young child who's not focusing,
one at a
you
time.
do 5 questions and then you can get a 30-second break and put a timer on, or you do 10 questions and you get a 2-minute break.
I was going to say the same thing. Often assignments are just too overwhelming. There's too many things being asked. So breaking that down into manageable steps, maybe with a reward of some sort after completing each portion, would be a way to manage that.
And even within the school, because even in the school setting, because if they're high functioning and they're in an inclusive setting, it might be that the amount of work that they have to do is overwhelming, even though the child is quote unquote bright, but they see that they have 50 questions to answer. This might be a conversation that you might have to have with the teacher and say, the child is getting overwhelmed because they're looking at the 50 and they're like, I don't want to do 50. I'm not doing 50. But it might be that they mark off only 10. You know what I'm saying? So it might have some compromise being met so that the child doesn't have that overwhelming feeling.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, because that's the next question I was going to ask on behalf of our participants. We were regarding the high functioning autistic child, because this parent is seeing that there's much being said regarding how to work with the younger children and with those who seem to be behind academically or have struggles academically. But this person was asking about the high functioning autistic child. If you could say something more regarding that. And you did mention a while ago, but if there's more that you'd like to say, this is a good time to do so.
I think with a high functioning child too, a lot of times they may be doing well with academics, as we said, and if it's something that they love, you may not have to even limit it. However, the area that they might be struggling in is more like the pragmatics, right, Marley? So that social aspect is where you kind of have to help with them focus. Maybe the zones of regulation, regulating, knowing how to regulate their body, pragmatics, like how to behave in social situations. And again, if you don't have a speech and language pathologist person teaching them and helping them with that as a parent, then you have to be the one to say, when we go into somebody's house, you really have to, try you're not telling them that they're high functioning, but you're knowing it. You're telling them, you say hello when you go in, the basic behaviors, like what we'd call, right? Manners and stuff like that.
And those are things that can be like that, those are things that can be practiced at home with family, with cousins, with friends, you know, just greetings, expressing their hello, also not oversharing, you know, for those higher functioning. Some just say everything on their mind, and as much as we love that they're speaking, they have to understand when the appropriate time to speak that thought is.
I think it's important to remember too that even if a child or an adolescent is considered high functioning, meaning they don't have a lot of support needs, they don't have no support needs. So they still are experiencing emotion dysregulation and benefiting from really all the things that we've been speaking about. And if they are able to speak and they have a strong grasp of language, and it's more of like the nuances of social skills that are difficult, a lot of role play, a lot of looking at stories or talking about scenarios or watching a movie and talking it through, those kind of things really help to walk through, hey, if this happens, what do you do? There's a lot of great like practice scenarios online, and even online social groups for teens with autism where they can really like in the moment practice these things too. And something else I just want to mention, it's not uncommon for kids who do have those lower support needs to experience more of these big feelings in their safe space, which is usually home, right? So they can be controlled, they can kind of regulate when they're at school or in other places, and they come home and they just let it all out. I've had parents say, like, why do they look so different here? And then they come home and they fall apart. Well, you're their safe person. They know that they can be themselves and they can release everything and it's going to be okay. So it makes it hard as parents to really like hold space for those big feelings, but know that that does happen. And it means that in the home environment, we can add on some of these techniques we've been mentioning to really help with that regulation and release of emotion.
Thank you so very much. That was quite comprehensive. You have touched on quite a bit. There are two other things that I'd like us to address or look at based on the questions that parents or facilitators have asked. Where there are multiple areas of challenge, for example, an autistic child, very severely autistic, as this person had put it, along with ADHD features, along with ID features. What are some other practical ways of handling the situation and managing such a child that sometimes seem like they cannot be reasoned with, you know, and may need other strategies apart from the ones that were described just now because of the multiple challenges that the child may be having. So this is a question that was put forward as well. So if we could deal with that one, please. And also for very young children, toddlers, the questions are being asked as well about strategies for very young children, toddlers, before school, right?
One thought that came to mind as you were reading the question, especially for kids who have autism and ADHD, which is super common, a very large percent of kids with autism also meet criteria for ADHD. So it's not going to surprise us if those two exist together. All these strategies are going to be helpful. So we might need to target some of the ADHD specific characteristics and behaviors, which is a whole other conversation, but these strategies are going to be helpful. For the intellectual disability side, I would say consider their developmental level. So if you have a 16-year-old who has autism and an intellectual disability, let's say their developmental age is more like a kindergartner, right? I'm not going to be using the things that we've heard that really help high schoolers. I'm going to be focusing on what helps somebody of a younger developmental level, because that's what's going to really speak to that teen, if you will. So we want to make sure that we're meeting them where they're at, but all of these techniques really can be helpful for these levels of comorbidity.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else need to weigh in or would like to weigh in on that?
Just to confirm that you're going to meet the child at the level that they're at. So if I can draw from even within a classroom, of a preschool classroom, I talk a lot about my visual schedules and so on, but within a classroom of 7 children and they're all ages 3 or 4, some of the children can read, so their schedule will be written. Others not yet reading, their schedules would be pictures. But then I'll have some children who are more complex and their schedule might even be items, might be like actual items, because we're trying to meet the child at the level. So for them to know it's lunchtime, maybe it's a little plastic fork. For them to know it's art time, maybe it's a crayon, because maybe intellectually they're not even recognizing the pictures yet. So we're using the actual items. So it just goes along with having to meet the child at the developmental level and the intellectual level that they're at.
And I think that goes back to us saying that we can't compare child to child.
Yeah,
Everyone needs to just be met where they are.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. And as we come up onto the ending of the question and answer segment, one of the questions that was asked was whether the curriculum that was referenced in the discussion can be accessed by facilitators and caregivers of autistic children, and how.
Yes, and zones of regulation, if you just Google it, you'll see it will come right up. So
Could you
yes,
please repeat that, Miss? Please repeat
the
it.
zones of that curriculum, that zones curriculum is, if
Why
you,
is we're not
it's I think somebody want potty training. The zones of regulation curriculum is very accessible by, if you put it in YouTube, going on Amazon, there's like actually books about it. I'll show you the books. So it's a very accessible curriculum that can be reached. But yes, the actual zones curriculum can be shared to the PowerPoint if that's what they're talking about.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what they're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. Thank you very much. We'd like to let our participants know that the recording of this session will be placed in the Mico CARE Centre's YouTube page. All right. So when it's placed there, you will be able to access it so you can check